In Russian Fishing 4, your rods and your reels are very valuable, and if you use them incorrectly, they can break very quickly. So that your rods and reels last longer and don't break so fast, you should follow a few important rules when setting up your rods. So, let's take a look in this video at exactly how you set up your telescopic rod setup, your spinning setup, and your bottom fishing setup. To make sure you don't miss any other videos from this tutorial series, subscribe to the channel right now and share this video with your fishing friends. So let's take a look at the most important information we can read from our rods and reels. We start with the telescopic rod, so we press the I key and now we have our inventory. The telestick, we already have it automatically in our inventory, and there we can already see the setup. How is the setup built now? And under I, so up here on the screen, the small information I, we click on that again, and that gives us the really important information. These pieces of information are always essential for all rods and reels. If you already have your setup in hand, you can simply press the V key. That brings you directly into this information window. At first, it looks like this. Here again, you need to press the I once, and then you have the information. You can also view the details for all other items the same way. Just use the right mouse button, click on Detailed, and right away you have all the detailed information about each individual item. So, when you now have this information for the telescopic rod, there are three important pieces of information here. So the three important pieces of information for the telescopic rod are, of course, the load capacity, also the length, and the casting weight. These three pieces of information are now relevant for you. That's essential for evaluating a telescopic rod and for what kind of fishing it's suitable for, or how you use it. So we have here our three important values: load capacity, length, and casting weight. So that our telescopic rod with a load capacity of 4 kilograms doesn't break, we have to make sure that the load capacity of the line is below the load capacity of the rod. If the rod can handle 4 kilograms, the line should be under these 4 kilograms. In our case, we now have a line of 3.5 kilograms on it. Additionally, you can make sure that you use a monoline. Monoline exists in different versions. The big advantage of monoline is that it has a kind of rubber effect, so it's stretchable. And because it's stretchable, we have the possibility to fight much stronger or heavier fish in the water with the telescopic rod, to tire them out and pull them closer so that we can then land the big fish with the net. But the casting weight is also essential here. If we constantly use the rod above the maximum casting weight, we get a much higher wear on the blank, and the blank of the rod cannot be repaired. That means with every % of wear on the blank, we reduce the load capacity of the rod by the same amount. So if our rod here with 4 kilograms load capacity has over time maybe 15% wear, then it becomes dangerous again, because 15% wear means that the load capacity of the line is now above the load capacity of the rod. If we have 15% wear on the blank, our telescopic rod now only has a load capacity of 3.4 kilograms. And because the line holds 3.5 kilograms, our rod is in this case the weakest link in the entire chain and breaks first. So the moment when the line is stronger than the rod, or the rod is the weakest link in the entire chain of our setup, the action bar below shows the total load that lies on our rod. The action bar below always shows you which part of your entire setup is currently the weakest link. All this sounds, of course, super theoretical, and then you have to calculate and you have to figure out the percentages. When calculating percentages, just ask Google. It will immediately tell you how much load capacity your rod still has, even down to the exact gram. And then you're on the safe side, and nothing will break. Despite all that, these theoretical things are also essential and super important for fishing. so that your setup doesn't break. Especially later in the game, when you buy yourself very expensive rods and reels, you'll want to use them as long as possible. If at some point you've set up your setup incorrectly, using a float that's too heavy or baits that are too big, you'll immediately see a warning message at the bottom right of the action bar, that little weight icon, that kettlebell with the kilogram sign. It will light up. Then you should rebuild your setup or use slightly different baits, because otherwise you'll simply increase the wear. And if the wear eventually becomes so high that one of your setup parts is over 50% worn, then the warning triangle at the bottom of the action bar will light up. Now let's take a look at the spinning setup. That one too we already have in our inventory at the beginning. That means again, we press I, look at our spinning setup in the inventory, and of course again, we go straight into the detailed information. And if you just clicked here in the video because float fishing didn't interest you, still take another look at float fishing in detail, because there's a lot of information there that's generally valid for the overall setup and wear in the game, or of your setup. With the spinning setup, we now of course have one more component in our entire setup, and that is the reel. Here too, we can again read out important information under the small information I. Essential for the spinning setup are the following pieces of information that we can read here. The most important thing with such a spinning setup is first the casting weight. Then comes the load capacity, and after that comes the power value. That means to be able to correctly assess a rod in the spinning category, these three values are essential. It's not primarily about how much load capacity a rod has, but especially in spinning, how large the casting weight is. And here there's also one more piece of information that might count as a fourth important one, and that's the durability. In this case, it says light, and that means there are different categories in the game. From ultralight to light to medium light, the rods are divided into special subcategories. In this case, we now have a light rod, and that means we're a bit limited with the reels we can use. Down here you can see the specification. We can use spinning reels here with a size of 1,000 and 2,000. So for ultralight, we can use 1,000 reels. For light, 1,000 and 2,000 reels. And for medium light, right, 1,000, 2,000, and 3,000 reels. Because using such a rod is already quite challenging, we receive additional experience points. In this case, it's 50% more XP. If you use an ultralight rod, it's 100% more XP. And if you use a medium light rod, it's still 25% more XP for each fish caught. Let's get back now to the important information that we can read from a spinning rod. As already mentioned, the casting weight is always very important in spinning because that determines how far we can cast a small lure. There are spinners with a weight of under 3 grams. Because we have a casting weight of 2 to 10 grams, we can still cast a spinner weighing 2.68 grams quite well. However, if the weight of the spinner is below the minimum casting weight of your rod, then the casting distance is extremely reduced. That means your lure won't cast far enough, and you'll get significantly fewer bites. Basically, you'll catch fewer fish. Likewise, the casting weight of the lure shouldn't be above those 10 grams, because then exactly the same thing happens as already explained with the telescopic rod. You increase the wear on the blank with every cast. And as we already know, we want to avoid that as much as possible because the blank cannot be repaired. That means if the blank is broken, it's broken. Then the entire rod is eventually broken. Or rather, the exact percentage of wear shown here also reduces the load capacity. Now with the entire setup, the reel naturally also comes into play. And if we look into the details of the reel, we can again see important information, like how much line fits on the reel. So here there's an indicator for different line thicknesses and accordingly how much line fits on it. But you can also easily test this yourself by selecting a line. Here you can always see the diameter of a line, and with a 0.19 millimeter thick line, we now have 141 meters on it. If we use a slightly thicker line, we only have 130 meters of line on the reel. This is always shown to you directly here. Additionally, we have here the brake power indicator, how much drag force this reel has, 3.2 kilograms of braking power. So if we set the brake here to the maximum with the mouse wheel, then this brake holds with 3.2 kilograms. However, make sure that, especially in the beginning, you don't fully close the brake. That usually leads to your line snapping, or if your setup is still assembled incorrectly, your rod breaking. I got into the habit, when I'm no longer quite sure how high my brake is set, to first turn the mouse wheel downwards. That way, I always open the brake first, but it's still better if the brake opens a bit during a fight than if you accidentally close it, because that usually causes some part of your setup to break. To use the maximum braking power of your reel, there's a fairly simple calculation. You take the braking power of your reel, in this case 3.2 kilograms, and multiply it by 1.5. That gives us 4.8 kilograms. That means your reel works best with a line of 4.8 kilograms. If you go significantly above that with your line, you don't really gain much. And you also have to keep in mind that a thicker line means less line capacity on your reel. So a line with more load capacity naturally has a larger diameter, and because it's thicker, fewer meters of line will fit on your reel. All this is of course a bit complicated, but it's important that you understand why we use certain setup parts so you don't make mistakes when assembling your rod. And if you can already answer why we don't use a 4.8 kilogram line here, then you're already a good bit ahead of many other anglers. I'll explain it, of course. Why don't we use a 4.8 kilogram line here? We could fully utilize the braking power because with 4.8 kilograms, we're above the load capacity of the rod. And that means that such a strong line will break later than our rod. 4.8 kilograms breaks later than 3.9 kilograms. And that's the important point. So if you accidentally close the brake and you have a line that's much too strong, your rod breaks. And that's the worst thing that can happen. If your line snaps, well then you lose a few meters, that's fine. Or you just get a new line. That's not that expensive. But especially in the mid-game and end-game, you don't want your rod to break. So always pay attention. What is the weakest link in your setup? What's the order in your entire setup? The order of load capacity. The highest load capacity should always be the rod. Below that comes the line, and below that the brake power. This whole topic sounds very theoretical again, but as said, it's super important for understanding the game. When we look at the bottom fishing setup in a moment, more components come into play, like the leader, for example. But as it's set up right now, especially at the beginning, these simple rules should help you so that nothing breaks. In the bottom fishing setup, we'll also look at the use of leaders. So that's one more component added. And if you're still not quite sure about all of this, take another look at everything and try to understand what's important. Starting with the setup, the heaviest, with the highest load capacity, is the rod. Then comes the line, and then comes the brake power. And if you build your setups like that, no matter what you buy later, if you stick to this, nothing will break anymore. Let's now take a look at a feeder setup. So a classic bottom setup. This applies to all bottom setups, whether they are feeder rods, picker rods, or carp rods. In this case here, I now have my feeder rods with a load capacity of 30 kilograms. I'm using a 6,000 full metal reel. You can buy that at the Christmas market. And along with that, a 32 kilogram line, as well as 2 leaders here in this setup. This right here is a classic setup for carp fishing. Afterwards, I'll show you the setup structure of one you can use, for example at the Windenbach, when you want to go bottom fishing there, meaning if you want to fish with simple natural baits and not with boilies. Also here again, the same rule applies. We can say, we first have the load capacity of the rod, then the load capacity of the line, and below that, the load capacity or breaking power of the reel. Despite that, we also have 2 components here that act as leaders, which again are below the load capacity of our main line. And we can also calculate that again. So again, it counts. 30 kilograms load capacity on the rod is the top value. That is the highest load capacity in the entire setup. Then we have a reel drag, and there we calculate 18.2 times 1.5, and that gives us a value of 27.3 kilograms. And in the setup here, as we can see, I'm currently using a monofilament line with 32 kilograms, so even a bit above those 27 kilograms. However, the 2 leaders below that are 27 kilograms each. That means, again, even if we use a line that is stronger, even if we use one that's above the rod's capacity, our entire setup is still limited by the weakest parts. So the weakest link in the whole chain are these 2 leaders with 27 kilograms. And if we look closely, we can see that due to wear on the simple braided leader, the load capacity there becomes even lower. And therefore, if something goes wrong, say I accidentally close the drag, then my leader should break. So that means, in this setup right now, the leader is the weakest link in the entire setup. Even if the line's load capacity is above the rod's, everything below still remains under the rod's limit, and I still have enough strength to use the maximum drag. As we just calculated, 18.2 kilograms times 1.5, we get 27.3. So we can really use the reel drag nicely. I can use this setup with the drag set to 29, and I can apply maximum braking force. Now let's take another look at the structure of, for example, the feeder set start, a simple bottom setup. Here we have the entire setup, just as you can buy it. So everything is exactly as it comes, already pre-assembled. For 149 silver, you can start bottom fishing really well with this setup. And again, the same rules apply for the structure of such a setup. Here we have a rod load capacity of 6 kilograms. That's the highest value on the rod. Below that, we have the main line with a load capacity of 4.8 kilograms, and below that is the brake power. If we now calculate again, we'll see that we're actually losing some potential here. That means if we take the 3.8 kilograms brake power, multiply by 1.5, we get 5.7 kilograms. That's the ideal line strength we could use. 5.7 kilograms is still below the 6 kilograms of the rod. So that's absolutely safe. So we could use 5.7 kilograms line on this setup and thereby gain more braking power. What we have to keep in mind though, if we use a line with higher load capacity, it will probably also be thicker, and that means we'll have fewer meters of line on the reel. So now we know that with 5.7 kilograms line, we can use our setup even better. That means let's now look in the shop for a suitable line so we can make better use of our drag. From level 12 onwards, if you want to fish at the Old Berg, you should definitely have more line on this setup. So let's first take a closer look at what we actually need when buying a new line. We right-click on the reel, go to Details, and there we see that when using a line thickness of 0.2 millimeters, we can fit about 245 meters of line on this reel. And that's not bad at all. So now let's see if we can find a line that's roughly that thick, but more importantly, that reaches as close as possible to those 5.7 kilograms. So in the fishing shop, click on Fishing Lines, and if we click again, just double click it, we'll see all line types at once. And here we immediately see a difference. We have monofilament line, we have fluorocarbon line, and we have braided line. Monofilament is significantly thicker than braided line. So the thinnest line is braided, then comes mono, and the thickest is fluorocarbon. Since we want to go as thin as possible, maybe even a bit economical, let's look at those braided lines. The black one looks quite nice. Now we need a suitable strength, and here we have the choice between 5 kilograms and 7.2 kilograms. And if we check the diameter, both are below 0.2 millimeters, meaning we'll get even more line on the reel. However, the load capacity in both cases, one is clearly below 5.7, the other is well above, even above the rod's limit. This line, though, we could use if we take a leader under rig components, feeder leaders, and then maybe fluorocarbon. Here we'll find a suitable leader, and if we build the setup like this, 7 kilograms main line, 5.4 kilograms leader, then we're again below the rod's load capacity, and nothing can go wrong. If we now look at monofilament lines, we'll see cheaper options, but we face a similar issue. We have 5 kilograms and we have 7.5 kilograms. 5 kilograms is certainly an option. We're slightly thicker than 0.2 millimeters, so we'll still have over 200 meters on the reel, which is perfectly enough for fishing at the old berg. However, it often makes sense to take a slightly thicker line because over time, wear reduces the line's load capacity. So if you invest that silver, it might make more sense to go for a slightly thicker line. This thicker one here with 7.5 kilograms, we can now put on our setup. Now we have about 160 meters of line. That still works great, even at the old berg. That will still be enough line. Then at some point we'll need a leader, and as we just saw, there are fluorocarbon leaders with a load capacity of 5.4 kilograms. And then our entire setup is properly balanced again. That means we have the rod protected by 6 kilograms capacity, then the line slightly stronger but protected by the leader at 5.4 kilograms. And with 5.4 kilograms, we also have a very good value to make full use of the reel drag. So with such a setup, you can make full use of it, brake properly, have enough line capacity, and even after weeks of fishing with this setup, as the main line wears, you'll still have enough load capacity across the setup. Again, it's important to understand why this is done, why your setup is built this way, so nothing breaks and you can get the maximum performance out of it. Also, of course, the other rules apply here. For example, that you must respect the casting weight. So, use weights that match the casting range so you can cast far enough, but also especially with heavier baits, that you don't exceed your rod's casting weight. Although in bottom fishing, it's extremely rare to go over the rod's casting weight. Feeder rods and carp rods are very robust. With picker rods, it happens much more quickly because they're much finer. And now you'd already have a setup that, as I said, works perfectly at the old berg, but also excellent at the Windenbach or Mosquito Lake. With such a setup, you can fish for a very long time, even beyond level 20, catching small fish very efficiently to increase your bottom fishing skill and earn silver for your next setup. I hope this whole topic wasn't too tiring or too theoretical or too complex, but it shows how deep Russian fishing 4 really is. You really need to understand how to build your setups. If this helped you, leave a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe, that helps me a lot. Share the video with your friends, and I'll see you in the next video or the next live stream. Until then, tight lines.